Hello, welcome to the Ocean of Sound Summit. Our guest today is Neil Douglas-Klotz. Amany and I are both very excited to have him with us today. I'll begin by introducing him, reading his bio. Neil Douglas-Klotz, Ph.D., is a renowned writer, teacher, and artist in the fields of Middle Eastern spirituality and the translation and interpretation of the ancient Semitic languages of Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic. Living in Scotland, he was for many years the co-chair of the mysticism group of the American Academy of Religion. A frequent speaker and workshop leader, he is the author of several books. His books on the Aramaic spirituality of Jesus include Prayers of the Cosmos, The Hidden Gospel, Original Meditation, The Aramaic Jesus and the Spirituality of Creation, Blessings of the Cosmos, and Revelations of the Aramaic Jesus, a new book which I have a pile of them right here. His books on a comparative view of native Middle Eastern spirituality include Desert Wisdom, A Nomad's Guide to Life's Big Questions, and The Tent of Abraham with Rabbi Arthur Waskow and Sister Joan Chittister. His books on Sufi spirituality include the Sufi Book of Life, 99 Pathways of the Heart for the Modern Dervish. I use this as a daily reference book, and you see it is very well used. And a little book of Sufi stories. He also edited 4 collections of the work of Middle Eastern mystic Khalil Gibran, another one of my favorites. He has written a mystery novel set in 1st century CE Holy Land entitled A Murder at Armageddon. I didn't realize that one was a part of your library as well, of your repertoire. So I want to welcome you and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you both.
It's an honor. It's an honor. Amany and I were talking before we got started here, and we're just so excited, a little bit starstruck, because we have used your books as reference and daily guides for myself. I'll speak for myself. Now, before I turn it over to Amany, I just want to introduce Amany as well, if I may. Amany is she's been a beautiful friend for a long time. She was for 12 years a translator for my spiritual teacher, Sheikh Muhammad al-Jamal Arafaya Shadali from Jerusalem. Amany has her master's degree in the comparative philosophy of religions, or did I say that correctly? Yeah, comparative philosophy of religions. Yes. Her postgraduate is in Islamic studies and Sufism. She is a founder of Universal Chaplaincy, and I have actually certified as a chaplain under her program as well. And she and I co-teach a program called The Ocean of Sound, where we get to dive into these, all the mysteries of sacred sound and everything as much as we can in our little drops of ocean, delving into the mysteries and the deeper meanings and the beauties. So welcome, Amany, and welcome, Neil. Is it okay if I call you Neil?
Absolutely, yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Welcome, Neil. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you here. I have to confess, like, I raised my children on your book, the Sufi Book of Life. Like, it was part of our daily practice and use. I wasn't very interested in the sound parts back then. Now I am. So it is always something new to find in the book. And I'm really interested to know, like, how did you become interested in the Middle Eastern, classical language and interpretation and sound? How did you start?
Well, again, thank you both for inviting me. Really, Amany, this began, I don't want to tell you my whole life story, but I was always somewhat interested in languages because I grew up hearing various languages in my family. Now, these were not really Middle Eastern languages, although I was raised in the United States in Chicago area. My parents and grandparents spoke a form of German, and my grandparents on one side, they also spoke some Polish, some Russian, some Yiddish, actually, as we found out later. And so as a child, I grew up hearing these different languages, and that predisposed me to be interested in languages and translation and these sorts of things. So when I went to university, I ended up with a undergraduate as a majoring in both English and German. And because one can't really make a living very well from these things unless one goes into teaching. And I wanted to, as many youth did in the 70s, I wanted to change the world. So I became a journalist, and I became an investigative reporter and went to work young, fresh out of university in New York City. I was hired. I guess I was good. And I learned all the tricks of investigative reporting. This is before the internet, you understand, where one had to understand how to cultivate sources and get people to tell you things they didn't want to tell you. Basically, it's a particular skill, I can say, and then look up things and be able to read various text government documents very fast, to skim through them and pick out what's true and what's not. So this was perhaps a predilection from my childhood, that I wanted to find out more, know more. I would say that's really where it came from. My parents were seekers of a sort, in that although we were raised Christian, they were really more interested in, how would we say, holistic health and the early ecological movement in the US, which was based around Rachel Carson. And then also they were interested in this channel, this American channel, Edgar Cayce, who you may have heard of, especially if you live in the US. And there's still a Cayce Foundation and many remedies that Cayce recommended in his channelings. And my father was interested in all of that. And so he sort of educated us in all of that, if you will. So to make a long story short, I remember I had a university professor in undergraduate in, you could say, world religions, and he chose to emphasize some of the early translations. When we came to Islam, he chose to emphasize some of the early translations of Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi. These were by Arbery and Nicholson, mostly in the 70s is what was available. And I became very interested in the Sufis, you could say early on. And then I put it aside because, in the university, you're not really that interested in religion. You want to change the world. And it's about, in that time, I sort of had been raised with some religion and sort of, well, not really. So I went to work as I say, an investigative journalist, first in New York, and then later I was in Denver, Colorado. And I became disillusioned, disenchanted with what seemed to be that even if you presented people to the facts of a situation, if you reported the facts, they didn't necessarily act on those facts. And I suppose I should have known this as a young person in my mid-20s, but somehow this struck me at a certain point. I became very depressed, and I went on my own, you could say, spiritual, psychological search. And how do I make decisions? Do I always make decisions based on facts, or I don't know what the facts are half the time when I make a major life decision. So at the time when I was living in Denver, I went to various spiritual groups, such as they were at the time. And this was again in the late 1970s or mid 1970s, really. And there wasn't that much to offer. And I wasn't really enchanted with any of them. And then I read a book by Idris Shah on the Sufis. And although there were no Sufis really in that area at the time, I began to research because I knew how to do research. Where are the Sufis? Who are these Sufis? Where are they? Is there anyone in the US, North America? And I ended up going to visit the event of a group in California who were a branch of the Chishtiya Sufi lineage. This is obviously for your readers, or your listeners who may or may not know, that the Chishti Sufis, their titular founder, Moinuddin Chishti, moved from, I think it's present-day Persia, Iran, to well, some area of northern India. He ended up landing in northern India at a particular time where the Chistis ended up being very influential on the Mughal Empire. Not the Mongols, but the Mughals. And so there was a sort of multi-faith, interfaith understanding at that time. And Moinuddin Chisti was very much favorable of this. So some of the early Chisti Sufi saints, they actually were involved in formulating the Indian science of raga, that is the science of sound, of chanting. And Amir Khusro was one of these. And so when I ended up with these particular Sufis, they were doing chanting, they were doing movement, they were using music, although in a sacred sense, not in a secular sense, along with the chanting. And I began to have very deep experiences from that. I recall one of the things that really struck me. I was originally, when I went, I thought, well, I'll get a nice article, a journalistic article out of this, even if it's not anything, if it's just another, if it's another dead end for me personally. But I was doing some of this chanting and some movement, and I recall we came to the end of a particular chant, and we were holding hands, as sometimes one does in various Sufis, hadrats or other sorts of circles. And I completely lost consciousness of where I was. I suppose today you would say I went out of my body temporarily. And then I came back in probably 30 seconds or a minute later as a prayer was being said, a spoken prayer. And then that really got my attention. So, and I had been mainly a very intellectual person, as you can probably surmise, up to that point. I mean, because that's the way I made my living.
Right.
But this chanting, this is the way I was trained, and writing and languages and research and all of that. But this we could say brought me more deeply into my body, into my heart, and then it got my attention. It really got my attention. Mm-hmm. So I went more deeply into this, and this was really the start for me in some ways. Now, because I was, I'll finish just briefly of this. Because I was still somewhat a suspicious person, I didn't trust the translations that these people were giving me of Sufis or Quran or Al-Quran or anything else. And so I began to, learn something about the Semitic languages at that point. So
they were chanting in Arabic?
Arabic mostly, yes. Some Persian, but mostly Arabic. It was, pretty elementary, but there were beautiful names, Asmaul Husna, that is some of the 99 most beautiful names. Some of the ones that are not in the 99 list, but are some of the other beautiful names in the Quran, they were being chanted. And then also kalama, various forms of kalama, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadan Rasulullah, and there are other kalamas, traditional kalamas in the Chistiya tradition. So these sorts of things.
Beautiful. I recall when I was first learning as well, I had that same suspicion, and it's like, well, I don't want to just chant something when I don't know what I'm saying, and I did the same thing. I said, well, I've got to understand it in English first, and then, learn more about the translation. And honestly, I have to, when I could feel comfortable with it and really put my heart into it and let go of the guardedness, and that's just when the miracles begin to happen and things start to open up. And I have to say, then when I found your book, which has with each one of the beautiful names, it has a section called Roots and Branches. As you know, I'm saying for the listeners, it has a section called Roots and Branches, which, expands on the individual sound codes and how they come together to form the meanings of the names. And that has really allowed me to take the study even deeper into my heart and become even more passionate. So I appreciate that immensely.
Yes, there's a long journey between what I just told you and when I was working with the 99 names. I'll just say, that when I began to look in the Chistiya tradition of sound, which in its most clear form in English can be found in the words of Hazrat Inayat Khan. He has a book on music, a book on sound, And I began to investigate this. It was clear that sound was not just words. It was not just words spoken that you would look up in a dictionary, but there was a vibrational aspect to the sound, especially so-called sacred sounds. And these sacred sounds, they could be Arabic, they could be, in cases, be Persian, they could be Hebrew. Later, I found that Aramaic was a real doorway, the Aramaic, the spoken Aramaic of Jesus, very important. You could say a key, a hidden key to what Jesus is really talking about in the Gospels, but also Sanskrit and a number of other languages that are traditionally chanted. So I began to investigate this more and more deeply.
So did you like start self-study, or you studied with a particular teacher on the sound topic?
I first studied with a Quran teacher originally, and he was from Pakistan. We had actually brought him over to teach us Quran because he was a friend of the lineage teacher of our order. I said, oh, so he spent a month going through the first Surah Al-Fatiha, and going over and over and over. And we said to him, Shamsuddin, you're giving us all these different meanings. Which of the meanings are the literal meaning? And he said, well, they're all literal meaning because there are layers and layers and layers and layers and layers. If you look at the root this way, it's this way. If you look at it this way, it's this way. You have to feel it. You have to feel it for yourself, what it is. And then at one point I went, before he went back to Pakistan, I said, Shamsuddin, let me sit you down with the tape recorder, when we still had tape recorders.
Right.
And let me go through this list of the 99 names with you. And I won't mention which translation I used, but I used one of the accepted translations of the Asmaul Husna. And he would say, yeah, that's not bad, but no, that one's completely wrong. That's terrible.
Wow.
That's very dualistic. Or where it says, do this so many times and your enemy will drop dead, or these sorts of things that one finds in some of these texts. And he said, no, it's not that. So I made some notes, and then I again put that aside because I thought, I'll return to that later. That seems important. In the meantime, I got very involved with the Aramaic words of Jesus. This is sort of in the mid-1980s because of, again, when I was doing an editing project, the lineage teacher of our particular transmission, and this was Samuel Lewis, Sufi Ahmed Murad Chishti, he had written that he wanted to learn to pray the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic, but he had never done that. And no one could remember him having done that. So I began to really follow that up. I mean, I had some Christian background, and I knew the Bible quite well. So I wanted to, then I was really intrigued, and this allowed me to go more deeply into not just the Arabic, but the Aramaic and the Hebrew, sort of almost simultaneously. Some with academic study, some with study with personal teachers, and some with Jewish Kabbalah teachers, to look at different ways in which you could triangulate the meaning. So this led me to get this Ph.D. in, what became ancient Semitic language hermeneutics, which is, you could say, the science of interpretation that is present in ancient Semitic languages. And there is a unified field, if you will, of this way of interpreting the roots. If you go back to the ancient Semitic roots, you can see how the different translations, for instance, that we have of the 99 names in the various books that you can find, you can see how the ancient Semitic roots actually make sense of all this, but also give the experiential meaning, show on an open doorway how to go deeper, where you don't just stop with the merciful, the compassionate, something out there. But no, this is a reality that is seated within the human, and this is very clear reading the ancient Sufis. These things are not things. These are not just qualities, attributes out there in some transcendental universe. These were seeded into the human at the first beginning, at creation, and it's up to us to bring them out. And it's very.
So you found like a common thread between those languages, because they are all stem from the same origin, and they are having things in common.
Yes, they all come from a very simple system that comes out of the ancient Middle Eastern peoples' nomadic experience. It comes from their nomadic experience. That means pre-agriculture, when they were simply traveling, following where their ancestors had gone. They were hunter-gatherers, using common term now. But in Southwest Asia, the language develops in a particular way, such that individual sound, the sound ah, creates a relationship with something that is both within me and around me, outside of me. Or a more held breath, a more, as we have in classical Arabic, the ghain or the ghain. These sounds, these this is more of a sort of a breath that is too trapped within my individual self. But that the original root in the Semitic alphabet is one letter, not two, not three. Each letter is a being, is like a living being that is Allah, or whatever you want to call that, speaking through us. This is how these languages evolve, not through grammar. Grammar happens only later, and this is a thing I point out in my new book more deeply in the Revelations of the Aramaic Jesus. Grammar comes much, much later. Just as it does when we are children, so it was in the childhood of humanity. We begin speaking, emulating our parents. We understand what a sound means, even if it's not a real word, an English word or another language, but what a sound indicates, the relationship it makes. And then gradually we learn sounds from our parents. We learn by speaking and relating and using them. And later when we go to school, they tell us, no, you can't speak that way. You have to speak this way, because this is the grammatically correct way to speak.
Right.
So each language, particularly the Semitic languages, go through the same developmental process. And this is extremely important. So by the time of, say, someone like Ibn Arabi, Mu'in Ibn Arabi, he understands this intuitively because he's a great mystic. And so Ibn Arabi says, for instance, the beautiful names, the Asma al-Husna, these are not things. These are not even God's names, so to speak. These are our names for those names. But that the real names are God's, Allah's activities within us that are always going on, always going on. And these activities of Allah always going on within us are numberless. It's not 99, it's not 900, it's not 999. They are numberless. And not only us humans, but in all beings around us, in nature. This was the ancient Middle Eastern understanding. This was the ancient Middle Eastern understanding. Anyway.
Go ahead, Amany. And it's absolutely beautiful. And I love that you say it, just when you said that it, in our child development, that we learn, and then when we go to school, it's like, okay, this is grammar, and this is the way that we are supposed to speak and structure our language with each other. It really takes us from that sense of being and feeling and communicating from that place up into the head of, like, okay, here's how I have to do it right. And you can, as you were saying, that I really got a sense of the disconnect and how the disconnect comes into our language and our communications, and we begin to, I guess, perhaps lose that natural connection, that connection to nature, and how how we communicate our feelings and our sense of connection with our environment.
Yeah, no, it's right. And that's on the personal level, Debra. You could say on the more global level, for instance, the Arabic that is spoken through Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as the Quran comes through him, also does not yet have grammar. It does not acquire so-called classical Arabic grammar for at least a couple of hundred years after his time. And it's influenced by various influences, not least of which is the fact that Islam, by that time, has become a sort of empire. And so the grammar that is, you could say, composed at that time, which stipulates a three-letter root of each Arabic word, the grammar has this tendency to greatly limit the meaning of the particular Arabic word, and
or to put it into
in a particular channel, you could say, and the particular channel that worked is really more of what we would say philosophically a Platonic model. That is where the transcendent is up here somewhere, and we're down here, the poor, flawed, everyday world, the immanent, but that the divide between them becomes greater and greater. And so this was an influence, and it suited an empire, just as it suited the Christian colonial empire to misinterpret Jesus's words, even from the Greek. I found, if I looked into the Greek more deeply, even from the Greek, these words were misinterpreted, mistranslated, almost deliberately to support colonialism and racism and a lot of other things that empires tend to be involved in. And I'm sorry to be so blunt about it, but that's what happened.
True. We need to understand what happened.
So, but on the personal level, you could say the sound meaning, the inner sound meaning, the relationship is still there. It's still there in the sacred words. But one has to get through sort of layers of things. So this is why, for instance,
drop back into the sounds and let go of the higher. I know that for myself, I'll be honest, it's difficult to just read the translation of Bible or Quran or any of the sacred texts and just take them word for word on the surface level. It's really hard to get through them in that way. And, I have found by just like saying, okay, that's here. Now, if I can just drop down and down and down and down, then it's like that's where you can start to feel that connection with sound, connection with deeper meanings and environment, the nature, cosmos, whatever mysteries want to be unveiled through that. As you said, there's many layers. And I feel like I'm just such a newbie at this. I did study with my spiritual teacher for, since the 90s, but so, I've been at it a while, and I still feel like such a newbie, still uncovering more every day. And there's so much, which is the beauty of it. The beauty of, the mysteries never end. As you said, they're numberless. And
I've been helped much. I'll just say I've been helped very much in the last 15 or 17 years since I wrote Sufi Book of Life. I've been helped enormously by Sheikh Fadlallah Hayeri, who lives in South Africa, who has many, and I've worked with him personally. I've gone to South Africa. He's come here to Europe, to the UK, and he encouraged me in this regard. He really liked Sufi Book of Life. And although he has his own book on the Asma al-Husna, the beautiful names, and so he would say to me, Sadi is my Sufi name. He'd say, Sadi, so what's the Semitic root for this word in Quran? He'd be doing live commentary, and I'd say, I'll look it up, Sheikh Fadlallah. He says, I want to know all of what he called the mother names. Nice. of the main words in the Quran. So I began finding more and more of them. This was even after I did the Sufi Book of Life. So I am working on a sequel to that book, although it's going slowly, of other very important sacred words that are in the Quran. And this is with Sheikh Fadlallah's help and his ongoing support for this way of looking.
I feel it will be for the sake of our audience, it will bring it to more feeling and understanding. If you can give us like an example of a word and the layers we're talking about and the mother roots that we're talking about. Would you please give an example or two?
Absolutely. One of the most commonly known and also given examples, many people know it now. I don't know if it's from my work or not. Many people know that, for instance, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, they both come from the ancient Middle Eastern root word Raham, or Resh, Hamid, Resh, He, Mim. That is the womb, something that's coming from a womb. And this is a word that is common to ancient Hebrew, ancient Aramaic, and also the original classical Arabic. Of course, we know Rahman and Rahim begin all of the surahs of the Quran, except I think one of them. And so you could say this ancient understanding that love, compassion is really a form of inner birthing, of radiating, if we feel the sounds, Ra, which goes back even to the Egyptian Ra, the sun god Ra, Egyptian also being a Semitic language, is ancient Egyptian. Ra-hum, a radiation, a Ra, a raying from hum, from that which comes from deep within. And if you meditate with or feel the sound hum, even today we use it as a non-verbal sound when we're not sure what to say. You know, someone says something and I say, or I might say, that's if I don't believe it. Or I might say, if I'm surprised, but again, don't know what to say. So something wants to come from as though within, and this is this radiating from the withinness, this humness. And no surprise, the root hum goes back also to the ancient sound that indicates Sophia, or Chokhmah, or Al-Khemmi in Egypt, Chokhmah in Hebrew being the name for holy wisdom. And then later we have it come into the beautiful names as Al-Hakam and Al-Hakim. So it divides into these two, but they all go back to this hum. And Aramaic has its own examples. Same.
It seems to me that these simple sounds, the way you presented it, that we do it naturally without thinking, is the most authentic way of communication.
Or for instance, take, since we're going there, take for instance the sound ooh. Ooh is another sort of, you could say, sound of surprise. I might say ooh. Something, I feel something very, very deeply, ooh. Or ooh, it's a deep surprise. This sort of thing. So this also in the Semitic languages, this goes into this connection between my individual self, my nafs as it's called in Arabic, or nefesh in Hebrew, nafsha in Aramaic, the connection between my individual self and that which empowers, that which created myself, my soul, so to speak, my ruh. And again, similar words in Hebrew and in Aramaic. So this oo sound is this moving back and forth sound. This is why it's part of the word ruh, because it also means breath. It's one of the many words for breath, but it's the big breath. It's not my personal breath I'm holding on to in my body. This is the breath that is within the breath. As Rumi talks about, or Kabir talks about it, the breath inside the breath, this sort of thing. All the Sufis speak of this. But the nefesh, or the nafs in Arabic, again, listen to the sound. It's really it's an N with a PH sound, which is sort of up in here. It's really like a held breath. Also, it's a word for breath, because we have the word anfas, nafs, anfas, but it's the personalized breath. It's the breath that is held in our bodies for a certain number of years in this flesh. We don't know how long. However the Holy One wishes, inshallah, but it's that personal breath which is held in these bodies for however many years in time and space we have, and And we're supposed to remember that there's a bigger breath.
Right.
And,
That
so it's
breathes it
like
all.
that. So these are some of the things I've gone into more recently, but they're very important.
Yeah.
They are very, it seems to me that hearing you speaking, that it is one way to read about it and one way to hear it from someone who has been studying and living it. It's like the written word is even limited in the way it will communicate the deep messages behind these sounds, right?
It's very true, Amany. I mean, this is why I have these little attempts at experiential contemplations in the book. And as I say in the introduction to Sufi Book of Life, you can use this book. I had inner permission, and also you could say outer permission from my spiritual teacher at the time, who is no longer in the body, to do this, because people have to start somewhere. And also because I was not being prescriptive with it. I wasn't saying, if you do this name so many times, you will get this goodie at the end. And some books do that. They'll say, or even more insidious, they say, well, if this is wrong with you, then this is the antidote. So it's in a sort of Freudian psychological sense, as one writer puts it. It's like you're patching holes in your id with these beautiful names. This is a very popular approach. I'm not saying it's not helpful for people. It can be. There's no question it can be, but it's not my approach. In Sufi Book of Life, I would say, if you happen to be drawn towards this beautiful name, or guided to it by your personal guide, and I recommend having a personal guide, if you're guided to it or drawn to it by opening the book at random and breathing in the heart, you may be experiencing this in your life. These may be challenges you're undergoing. This may be happening around you. So try this name. I mean, see where it leads you. I'm not telling you where you're going to end up. See where it leads you. They're all doorways to unity. They're all really a part of Tawheed, that is coming to this unity that Ibn Arabi and so many Sufis speak of. So it's all just starts in the heart, intoning a sound in the heart. That's all it starts with. You don't need 99 names. You don't need 10. You maybe need one.
You need the deep sincere, as my teacher used to talk about, the deep sincere. The deep
you
sincere,
need the
which
deep
comes
sincere.
from the heart.
It's 90% the deep sincere. So if you're in deep need or in trouble, that creates the deep sincere. Otherwise, one has to cultivate it with devotional means.
Yes.
And it seems like it's also a personal thing, right? It is not like a standard solution for everyone. If you take this and do this with it, that is the result. But rather, it's more an individual connection to it and connection to Allah.
It's absolutely that. Rather than saying, okay, I know I need more of this quality. Or I have this problem, so this is going to solve this. It isn't necessarily going to work that way. One has to cultivate, and again, as Rumi points out, Ibn Arabi, many of the great Sufis, one has to cultivate that individual connection you're pointing to, Amany, because the different names, they're active within us, the different sounds, they're active within us, the activities of Allah or the great mystery are active within us every day differently.
Yes.
As the Quran says, every day, the voice of the Quran says, every day I'm about something different. Every day I'm doing some different activity, the Quran says this quite clearly. So this is the way it works.
Yeah, one of my favorite teachings is that, just that when the breath is breathed into the body, that, this is like the ocean in a drop, the meanings of all of the names of everything in creation, and everything in creation, has a breath, has a sound, and the meaning of all of it is breathed into us. And one of the intentions I like to make when I call them the sacred sounds and the divine names is that the meaning that was given into me with my breath be illuminated and awakened for me and clarified,
Mm,
so that I can come into a wholeness through that knowledge that once, that God willing, is there to be awakened. So, as
mm,
we're here to be a representative of spirit and form as best we can in our human bodies through our human ego selves, that, just to have the desire, and the knowledge that we're still human, but the desire within that knowledge of just the limitations of our humanity, just to
yeah.
have that yearning is I think something that can draw us closer and can bring healing to the heart when the heart is missing something, and can perhaps extract a meaning or some form of healing or wholeness through invoking a sound and allowing that
Mm.
vibration to carry our hearts or souls to wherever we may be guided or being guided to at that time. um, it can be a very healing experience.
Mashallah, that's beautiful, Deborah. I couldn't put it better. And it's like a short version of what Genesis actually says when the first breath is breathed into the human being. We're supposed to be responsible for and realize we've downloaded the breath of all of the beings created before us in the previous days. And we're not supposed to dominate and rule over them. That's another terrible translation of the Bible.
Right.
We're supposed to feel ourselves within them.
Mm.
It's a big difference between over and within. And this is a
Big
mistranslation.
difference.
Big difference. So it's a mistranslation of the Hebrew. So I often say to people, start wherever you are. Intone on one note. Don't worry about what note it is musically. I had a voice teacher once said, he's an Indian music voice teacher. He said, one note is always in tune. You cannot be out of tune. Each person has their note. Again, quoting Hazrat Inayat Khan, each person, he says, is a note in the universal symphony of life. Find your note. And that means literally when you're
Wow.
intoning, feel the sound, high or low or whatever, or experiment until you feel your heart resonating. It's that simple.
Beautiful.
It doesn't
I
have
get
to be
chills.
complicated.
It is something you know and you feel. It is not like imposed from the outside. That's
No.
When
No,
you stay with a phrase, for example, of the sacred phrases, you can just chant it until you find your tone, and
Absolutely.
that will have the effect or the impact on you.
And, once you found that heart voice, as I call it, where you're not hearing yourself, you're feeling yourself here in the heart, more than you're hearing yourself. This is very important. Feel yourself before you start to hear yourself, because our hearing is sometimes layered over with all of these messages. Oh, I have a weak voice, or I have this voice, or I have that voice, or I was told to go sing in the corner, or these sorts of nonsense that children
Yes.
are told in school. Feel the heart voice. Then you always have a friend. You have a friend here. And then you can sing with other people, for sure, because then you know you can always return home.
Beautiful.
Find that home. This is what the Chishti Sufis say.
Oh, that is
Beautiful.
beautiful. Can I ask, this is I know that the translation of, or the interpretation of the Lord's Prayer, the Aramaic, is something that has, I believe, I sense has been something that you've been very passionate about. Can you give another example just from that, in that study that you've done, that interpretation that you've done? I would love to
Yeah.
hear something from that.
Yes, I mean, this is really where I began this deeper work into the Semitic languages. I had studied some Arabic before, but it was the Aramaic that allowed me to go more deeply into this. So, for instance, the usual translations of the first line of Jesus's prayer, the King James English, as it's well known, Our Father which art in heaven. But the Aramaic says, excuse me, Avun Deba Shemaya. Avun Deba Shemaya. And this is much more of a process than it is a being. The ancient nomadic languages were strong in this. So Arun, which some people commented sounds a little like Om, but is different. Arun is you could say from the source, from the source of all, from God, or whatever you want to call that, is coming a breath to us. And is giving birth to us, the sound bait or B in Semitic languages, Arun, and it's resonating here now in this body. This breath is always new. It's always, creation is always happening. It didn't happen 7,000 or 100,000 years ago. It's always happening. And this same breath is spread throughout, not somewhere up here, but it is Dibba Shemaya. Two prepositions here. Di, which means moving from and to somewhere, but also it's within somewhere. And where is it moving from and to and within? It's a realm of Shem, of light. It's a vibrational form of light, different from Nur, but related to it. But the Shem is like the wave reality that physicists speak about. And we have it, no surprise, the same Shem we have in a later form in the classical Arabic, Sim, as in Bismillah. Bismillah, with the name, with the light, with the vibration of Allah. With my next breath in this vibration, I'm taking my next breath, my next step, my next action. This is why we say Bismillah at the beginning when we begin, because that's our intention. That's our sincere intention. So this is just an example from the first line, say, of Jesus's prayer, but the rest goes on and on and on through this. And this, there's a whole chapter in my new book about this, but also in my earlier book. But the new one is much better, I have to say.
Beautiful. So the first word, Awun.
Awun. Awun or Awun. It's the B and the W sound are like one sound in the ancient Semitic, ancient Aramaic, ancient Hebrew, ancient, not modern Hebrew. And so this, it means both within and among. We only have one preposition in the ancient Semitic languages. That which is within me is also around me. I'm among. So this immediately tells us that
everything.
Yeah, within and among, so that there's a connection between what I consider my inner world and what is around me, nature. Ancient humans understood this quite clearly. We've forgotten, so we think my inner world, my psychological world, that's only to do with me and nothing to do with anyone else. But we know, of course, that that's not true.
Yeah, beautiful. It reminds me that one of the things that, that we've been studying that with the ooh, that it is also a realization or a recognition of the beauty, of the divine beauty. As you said, we say ooh for many reasons. Ooh is also ooh.
Absolutely.
How beautiful is this world, and how beautiful is, when we recognize and see the divinity within that which is around us and within.
It's each of these are really, if we talk about just the beautiful names, the 99 beautiful names, which are mentioned in the hadith of Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, each of these are really a doorway. They're a doorway to go, to travel. We're not supposed to stop there or stop with any translation, including my translations. Find your own relationship to it. There is a range of meaning, and I try to help people get into that range of where you could say the ancients felt that this sound sort of cradled them. Again, over not just from the time of Prophet Muhammad, but for thousands of years before, these mother names, so to speak, they are cradling humanity's understanding of the universe around them and how that relates to what they feel or beginning to feel within them.
Beautiful.
There's it is when the individual is resonated with cosmic. So this ancient sound that began with the nomads was like that. They were already immersed in nature and with the cosmos. They would read the phases of the moon. They were very connected. We became very disconnected, so we almost also lost the meaning of these sounds in their depth.
Yeah, no, that's very true, Amany. And the change in our human consciousness happens very gradually, such that we don't notice it because we've only lived in these forms, in this body, we've only lived this lifetime. But if we see, even if you've lived a certain number of years, and I think you both have lived a certain number of years, you see that our culture has become more self-oriented. Modern culture, what I call a selfish, selfie culture. And this has led to many, many problems. So even 400 or 500 years ago, much less at the time of Prophet Muhammad or Jesus or these folks, the human self was not so isolated within itself. It was much more connected, much more, as Thich Nhat Hanh talks about, the Buddhist teacher, it was more of an interbeing that we had with what is around us. And now we need spiritual practices, we need chants, we need whatever we can use, meditation, breathing, awareness practices to sort of bring us back, but in a new way to where our ancestors already were. Because now we have this human self. How are we going to use it properly? How are we going to use our human self properly? This is the question of the day.
Yeah. So beautiful. And it just, I feel that calling, that connection, just, excuse me, I can't help but, I don't know, maybe I'm off here, but I feel like, our humanity and our planet, it feels like we really can't go too much farther into the separation, the separateness than we've gone without a really strong contraction back. And so, this, I'm seeing it even more and more as a way to bring us back to that connectedness with our deeper inner selves, as well as the nature and the cosmic, and the breath, the ruh. And
absolutely.
so it's very
basic
important.
foundation, returning us back to the basic foundation of your being.
Yeah. No, it's very true. Well, everything is just right in front of us now in our culture. We see the effects of this trend towards more isolation, more isolated sense of humanity, more isolated sense of self, a large rise in mental illness, particularly amongst young people, because they don't see a purpose in life. And so however one can rediscover this connection through chanting, meditation, whatever, through work with the ecology. Some people work, deeply, young people working deeply in nature also. All of this helps too, because they're breathing more a natural breath. And
Yes.
it's very important.
Beautiful. It really brings the natural healing into a clear, just, I guess, clarity around just the powerful healing that we can get from that.
And whatever we individually can do, we do. We don't have to do what everyone else is doing. I mean, you're both doing this podcast series or this summit, great. You will touch people that I never would. Well, I am now, but anyway,
Right.
You understand what I'm saying. So one
do.
does what one can in one's everyday life and what one is called to do. Very important.
Yes. Beautiful. So, just as a final wrap up to this beautiful discussion that we've had, and I appreciate so much. Is there advice that you would like to give to people who are listening, who are feeling inspired to just tap more deeply into this experience within themselves, or the experience of sacred sound, the deeper meanings? What advice would you give, or anything that you would like to say to the people who are listening?
Well, as I said, begin, if you feel a need and you feel drawn to this work with so-called sacred sound or sound, begin with something reliable. Begin with, say, one of the beautiful names, or you could say one of the essential names that Jesus uses, which are in my books, or an essential name in Hebrew or another language, Sanskrit, and find in yourself where that heart voice is, where that resonance is. And then find the need. This is what Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi says. Increase your need so that Allah can increase Allah's gifts to you. And so that doesn't hurt. I think it's not difficult to find need. If they're our own or our family's need, personal need, our family's need, there's need. There's need is all around us. So find a need, feel that, and then, go from there.
As Rumi said, the crack is where the light comes. So that is when we are in need. This is where we are empty to receive.
Yeah, absolutely. The darkness needs the light to, light needs the darkness to go into it. So in our realm, our time-space realm, we need them both. Even the verse of light says this, which I won't go into the verse of light today, the Ayat al-Nur, but this is quite clear from that.
We would love to have you again, inshallah, so you can talk more about these topics.
Yes.
Happy to anytime. I appreciate that you're inviting me and the work you're doing. It's very important. It's very rare I get asked about these things, actually. Mostly people want to know about the meaning of this and that and the other thing and all of that. And that's important too, because it gives people an experience, or it gives people an excuse to have an experience, which is my main affirmation. Here's an excuse to have your own experience. But in terms of the actual sound and all of this, there's so much that is there, and I'm glad you're doing a longer series on this. So, mashallah, inshallah, it'll go very well for you.
Inshallah, yes. Thank you so much. I really appreciate everything that you've shared, everything that you've given, knowing a little bit more about your journey and your life and how it's evolved for you. It's very inspiring, and it really has inspired me to continue to dive deeper and deeper and expand the knowledge, and it's expanding the knowledge. I love what you said about the need. It's like when we really allow that need to deepen within, that's like, for me, it's like what sparks that yearning, and which is what like a tractor beam really draws us to that home note.
Yeah.
Excuse me, that resonant home note. So it all goes full circle.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I thank you so much. I want to let people know how they can reach you if they want to learn more about what you're doing. I've held up a couple of your books here, the very well-worn book of the Sufi Book of Life, and the new book I have now, the Aramaic Jesus, which I'm diving into and so far loving it. All of these can be found at your website, abwoon.org. ABWOON, abwoon.org. And you also have a Facebook page, author Neil Douglas-Klotz, all one word together there. Oh, again, I want to thank you so much.
If people go into my website and dig further into it, where people don't usually go, you'll find in the library an index of chants where you can actually hear me doing various sorts of chants from the beautiful names and things like this. And it's just there. You just click on it and you can hear some teaching. Usually there's translation in German, because I was teaching at a summer school in Germany where it's English German. So anyway, all those things are there, and many chants are there too.
Beautiful. Well, I appreciate so much of what
great
you've
to
done.
Explore. Yeah.
Yes, and the resources that you have available for us very much. Thank you. So I just want to say to listeners as well to stay tuned. We have more interviews coming in this series, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you.
Ma salami. Thank you both.